Alrighty. So for the part 4 of my learning map assignment, I decided to do my interview with my dad, Larry Meyer. Dad, you were a teacher. Do you want to tell us about your teaching experience?
Yes, I'm a professor emeritus from Cal State Long Beach, where I taught journalism and literature. I got my undergraduate work to UCLA, BA in English, and a master's in journalism. And I'm interested in how the lower grades are taught. I've never done it or been there. And are you ready for me?
So yeah, that's great. You were my audience for the learning map part 3, where I did the lesson. I designed the lesson. You were my audience of 1, right?
Yes.
So I thought you would be the best person to do the interview with. You were there live, and you can tell me, more than anyone else how I did with it. So, you want to ask me question number 1?
Yes, based on your analysis of student learning evidence, establish what has been learned and by whom, what has not been learned and by whom, and who needs additional support to meet the standard. What have you learned about our students' learning characteristics that you did not realize previously?
All right, so obviously I don't have any student learning evidence because of COVID. We couldn't do the lesson with a class full of students. I can only do the lesson with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really have student learning evidence, so it's hard to make any determinations based on that. How would I establish what would be learned by whom? I had things built into the lesson, like when we were asking, right, it was who, what, when, where, and why, and how.
Mm-hmm.
When I was presenting the information, I was having you fill it out with me, right?
Yes.
I wasn't just directly telling you, this is what means. I was asking you to use knowledge that we had supposedly previously had in the class and have you take a part in guiding it, right?
True.
So anytime I'm asking that and having you guide it, that's an informal assessment. And that would be student learning evidence right there that I could then use to adjust my instruction and to see, what is being learned by whom and what is not being learned by whom. If I'm informally assessing and I'm noticing that someone's struggling, then I am going to have that evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I don't know, I've seen that in the observations I've done in classrooms, is that with younger kids a lot, the more you ask them and the more you let them lead it, the more you can constantly be getting information on their progress. And you use more formal assessments as well, but you constantly use that informal assessment. And what have I learned about students' learning characteristics? Again, that's a really hard one because my only student was you. And I know it's different, but what were... I don't know. What were ways when you were a teacher that you would try to monitor progress and see how people were doing? Was it just strictly grades? It was older.
It was largely grades, but I also rewarded class participation. In a sense, you reward the extroverts, and you can overlook the introverts, which is a separate problem, and you have to coax it out of them, and oftentimes they don't want it coaxed out. So, I would say that's what I recall most prominently. Yeah. But to John Dewey said, we learn by doing. And the more the person can be involved in expressing themselves on the subject being discussed, the better. Mm-hmm. Learning by rote is passive and you don't retain it.
Definitely. And the more personal it is, the more engaging it is, and the more it's going to be lasting.
Yes.
And worthwhile learning.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So let's jump on to number 2. You want to read me number 2 there?
Formulate how effective your instructional design was based on your planning and teaching as evidenced by data collected on student process and products of learning.
So again, because of the circumstances, there is no data collected on student process and products of learning. But how effective was my instructional design? So going through it really quick, I did the video at the beginning, right? And the video, I wanted to be fun. It's kind of music-y, kind of gets the kids into it, gives them a fun representation of the who, what, when, where, and why before we really dive into it. Then the next thing we did, what was the second one? We went through and we discussed what those things were in a story. Who, what, when, where, and why. And we discussed just broadly what the terms were and how we would be looking at them in a story. Then we went through and together, right, I asked questions, and in the assignment it called for us to relate our information to the previous week's information. So obviously with no classroom, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do actual scaffolding. But what I sort of imagined was last week's lesson was reading folk tales, and that's where the John Henry thing came from. So yes. I was bringing that in as the previous lesson. So I used that story to dissect the who, what, when, where, and why. And I did that in a question format, right? I had you answer the questions, and then I would confirm. I mean, obviously there was no one there, so I was saying it, but I was trying to present it in a way where you were guiding it, and I was letting you learn it and see it for yourself, so that then we could go on to the next phase of the lesson, where it was a group assignment, right? We did the group, or I think we did a worksheet first. I think we did a worksheet, and then we did a group assignment, and we went through the group assignment with the entire class, elbow partners. So elbow partners means 2 people working together, and I thought that would be a good one for getting, like you said, the more introverted kids, especially at younger ages. If you let them break up the monotony of just working on their own thing, and you let them do something where they get to interact with another kid and talk with another kid in a constructive way, can be a huge positive for learning. Mm-hmm. So I tried to bring collaborative learning into it. And then the last lesson was the homework, which was the Rosa Parks, who, what, when, where, and why. And we went over that. We reviewed it really quick so that they would know what to expect for homework, which I think is great. I know a lot of times when I was in school, it would have been nice to have teachers sort of give you a heads up, give you some recon on what your homework's going to be, but... So I really tried to be intentional in how I designed the lesson, but we don't have any evidence or data, so can't really go on that. You want to ask me number 3?
Sure. Moving forward, how will you plan differently based on your knowledge of student learning characteristics, both previously known and newly discovered? Which additional differentiation strategies in multi-tiered levels of support will you consider?
So I know it goes without saying, but again, this question is kind of I didn't really get to get any information on student learning characteristics because you were my only student, and I didn't really. The information that I would use to make decisions on what differentiation strategies and what multi-tiered levels of support would be necessary for the students in my class, can't really make that decision because there are no students in the class. But you were there. Did you think there were things, if you imagined a class full of second or third graders being there for that lesson, do you think there were things I could have done better?
That's difficult to say.
It's a hard
I know the
hypothetical.
COVID-19 pandemic has really crippled you, hobbled you guys. But I was just wondering, you taught soccer to young students for 2 or 3 years. Do you think what you learned there is transferable to this imaginary class of second, third, or fourth graders? Does that give you a feeling in your guts that you can handle most anything that comes up in the classroom?
It really does, because it's kind of like with anything. You're a writer too. With anything, with writing, with playing sports, with teaching, you sort of develop a style and a way that you do it. And like you said, I've been doing soccer shots for many years, probably 4 or 5 years now, and the biggest experience I've gotten from soccer shots is really how to have a class full of like 12 kids and hold their attention for 45 minutes. So the style thing, I kind of feel comfortable being up there in front of the kids, because that's the part of teaching that I have the most experience with. What I don't have the most experience with, and which is a bummer that I don't get to do assignments like this, with a real class full of students, is to like try out how am I going to keep their attention for a full 5-hour, 6-hour class day instead of a 50-minute chunk. How am I going to keep their attention while they're inside the classroom versus outside running around on the field like a maniac? And one of the things that I've seen in my observations is, as a teacher, to set really clear expectations and rules, and to just lay it out there very early on so that everybody knows how it's going to be. And if people are having struggles with that, then talk to them, figure out how are we going to change this? How are we going to change this behavior? And a big thing that I liked from our readings was about self-regulating and getting it to the point where it's not you punishing the child, it's the child developing coping strategies to realize, oh, I'm not behaving as is expected. I need to rein myself in.
Did you have any severe disciplinary problems, and how did you handle them? Kids on the field can get pretty hyped up.
Yeah. I had some discipline problems. What I always did if it got out of control was, and I was lucky that we were on a soccer field, and usually, half the time, the parents had to bring them to the soccer class.
Mm-hmm.
So I had one day where I got punched in the eye, and I just took both of the kids. Another kid told a kid to punch me in the eye, and I took both of them back to their parents, told them what happened, and that
Mm-hmm.
I kept my cool, I kept my composure, and at that point, there's nothing I can really do.
Yeah.
So I think I've got the patience for it,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah. So
Number 4.
number 4, let's do it.
How would you modify, extend, or incorporate new levels of presentation, expression, and engagement for each learner's group as it relates to their processes and products of learning? Remember to video.
You don't have to read this.
Okay.
This isn't the question. All right. So, how would I modify? So I had different ways that I presented the content in my lesson, right?
Mm-hmm.
The first way I presented it was the video, which was sort of, you just get to sit, you listen to the song, you watch the video. It's sort of a passive intake.
Mm-hmm.
Second was direct instruction, a quick little bit on direct instruction, to just tell you, here is what who means. Who is the person, the character that the story revolves around, and give them an example. Like in our story, John Henry, the who is John Henry, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was another level, another method of presentation. Then the worksheet, that would be another level of presentation, working on a worksheet, doing a collaborative assignment with your partner. That is another form of presentation. So I tried to incorporate multiple levels of presentation, expression, and engagement in my lesson. Now, to do more of that, I had other ideas that, I wasn't going to be able to fit. Like, one was, I thought this would be fun since I played sports a lot, but you sort of have a ball and you can take them outside and have all the kids go in a circle, and on different parts of the ball, write who, what, when, where, and why, and then they get to bounce it to each other, and whichever part they read, they have to come up with the who of the story, and then they pass it to a friend, and the friend comes up with the what of the story, I thought that would be a fun way to do it because it's kind of creative. It's good, especially if you got a really rambunctious class they need to get some energy out, which in a lot of my observations, I've seen a lot of classes where at a certain time of the day, the kids either just they check out or they get really hyper. So I've seen teachers do things where they stand up and they do quick calisthenics. So trying to incorporate that, I think, is a good way. Obviously, if we were in a classroom, we would have way more technology. They would be able to be using laptops, learning applications, games, all kinds of things that I don't have access to, just at home, given the way things are. But those would be good, different levels of presentation. And, or writing your own story is another one that I thought would be an obvious one to just
Mhm.
creatively choose your own story, pick your own who, what, when, where, why, and how, and write it
Mhm.
out. And I'm sure there are also worksheets to guide that, to guide you in writing your own little story. Um, yeah. So, I mean, do you have anything on that?
Well, it is ironic that the who, what, when, where, and why is the basic lesson of beginning journalism. That is how you learn to write a news story, and it's supposed to be contained in the lead paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering if when you have dealt with soccer players, young soccer players on the field, and I apply it inside where eventually you will do it in a lecture, you will face your students in a lecture. How do you handle the presentation? Do you broadcast generally, or do you try to make eye contact with students and go from one to another? And how did you find it on the soccer field?
So,
In other words, the value of eye contact with a person, which is something I found when you do that, you've engaged them. Yeah, everything's more intimate.
so I'm hoping that lecturing is only a part of it, and that there can be a lot more other ways to present the information. Like maybe you have like a reading carpet for second graders,
Mm-hmm.
and you be very, like I was saying earlier, very clear with expectations, very clear with, if we're all going to come sit on the reading rug, we need to be quiet. This is like, we all get to come sit together and we get to listen to a story. And they have the expectations, and they know that when they go to that spot, they're going to learn in a certain way. And then maybe you have group activities, so you have them break off into little clusters and have them learn in that different way. And that can all be a good way to keep a kid engaged, because if it's just a lecture and it's just one method of learning over and over and over again, some kids are going to get left behind. Some kids are gonna, some kids might not be auditory listeners. Some kids might be visual learners or auditory learners. They might be visual learners. So if you're just lecturing about something, that might not help them. You might need to come up with another way. So, it's hard. It's hard to say how I'm going to do that, because I haven't had a class yet, and I haven't even had the experience of student teaching yet. But the main thing I've been thinking is just preparation and preparing and coming in with an intentional lesson plan, built for your students, know which students need more help, know which activities are going to best engage your students. And that's the kind of thing that, in Soccer Shots, as the season goes on, you do learn, how to treat each class, what games get each class excited, how much you have to focus on behavioral issues in the class versus actual content. So, you get the information as you do it, but not having done it, it's hard to say how I would do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
I agree. As I think I told you before, I think the secret to teaching, good teaching, is first to be excited about your subject. Love it. If you don't like it, you're not going to do that well. And then the next thing is to try to transmit that excitement to the student.
Mm-hmm.
And that means a dramatic presentation. that gets their juices flowing, not a dull, droning lecture.
Yeah.
I just have had success that way. And finally, of course, this probably would not pertain at the level, grammar school level you're talking about, but it might. I don't know. But I was always known as a non-know-it-all professor. I would take, when I heard somebody who knew more about a subject than I would say, why don't you come up and teach the class? They laugh, and but I was serious because I want them to tell me where I'm wrong or what. And I found that very rewarding for them and for me because they taught me.
Yeah. You're always a student and a learner, or a student and a teacher at the same time.
Yes.
Constant.
For sure.
Alrighty. Well, thanks for doing the interview with me, Poppy.
You're welcome, Seth.
You want to say bye-bye?
Bye-bye.
Man.